The following is a conversation with Christopher Baird. I hope I pronounced that correctly, and if I didn't, please forgive me, Christopher. Christopher is the head of e-commerce for Puma South Africa. Previously, he's worked for New Balance and eComplete, a company that offers e-commerce management as a service. To say that Christopher has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to e-commerce is an understatement. He's incredibly passionate about the topic, and we barely scratched the tip of the iceberg in this conversation. In this conversation, we cover the current e-commerce landscape in South Africa, what makes a good e-commerce manager and how young people can get into the field, sport, specifically running and kayaking, or as we colloquially call it in South Africa, paddling, Puma's company culture and why it encourages sport and fitness, and how business leaders can incentivize and foster a culture of sports and fitness in their companies. Lastly, we also spoke a bit about the underlying e-commerce infrastructure at Puma. I really hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I had a blast. This episode is brought to you by The Roundup. It is my very own newsletter, and it is a weekly newsletter that I send out to currently over 300 people every week. It's growing incredibly fast. By between 30 and 50 people per month are subscribing to this newsletter. Every week I share at least one cool thing that I found on the internet, a thought of my own or a synthesis of the two, as well as tips, tricks, and other interesting things to do with entrepreneurship, self-development, and productivity. You can head over to my website, rossgriffin.com, and hit the newsletter tab to subscribe. The newsletter is also a great place to ask me questions, interface with me, and possibly even get onto this podcast if that's what you so desire. Why don't you start by telling me about who you think is doing e-commerce incredibly well in South Africa, what you admire about them, and what are they doing incredibly well?
Good. Yeah, look, I certainly would like to believe that we're doing a pretty superb job. I think what makes us unique is that we're very much globally aligned. Few global brands have such global alignment when it comes to local or kind of regional implementations and kind of ongoing management. So there's a ton of consistency across our regions in terms of what we do, and that we do it the same. We kind of lead with one tech stack. But other than that, I won't get into too much about what we do because that wouldn't be fair. But I think locally, I think almost all brands are effectively online. Some doing a far better job than others. I don't have any specifics. I couldn't give too much insight other than what we do. I think the Takealot and Superbulous kind of business merger is interesting, and yet to see that unfold into one platform. Possibly two different sort of segments there that they're wanting to still separate, from a customer aspect. Super curious in terms of Amazon and what that landscape looks like when they come. That's going to be disruptive and potentially complementing in some aspects. Curious on
when Amazon comes to South Africa, what do you think that's going to look like? Do you think Takealot's going to completely tank, or do you think they're going after slightly different markets?
Look, I think there's healthy space. There's an interesting competition commission discussion. Maybe there's obviously a merger discussion somewhere, and so I see it strong competition versus potentially a merger down the line. But if you look at Superbulous and Takealot's from a business merger, that's still separated in terms of websites and customer segmentation. So even if with a merger that could remain as it currently is with them, really early days. They're going to come with some heavy deep pockets and some crazy tech stack, disruptive.
A lot of experience as well.
Tons of experience. Logistically, they're kind of true 3PL supply chain efficiencies and real 1 hour delivery, let alone sort of drones. I suspect Takealot's been gearing for this. It's the inevitable, and so what they're doing behind the scenes, who knows? They would obviously be crazy not to have been doing something. So going to be interesting.
Yeah, maybe them merging or getting bought out is not such a bad thing, because I saw somewhere that to this day they're still not making profit, if I'm not mistaken. I think their main thing in true startup form, not that they're a startup anymore, has been market capture and dominate the market kind of thing.
Yeah, they've strategically been running at a loss in terms of market share, and that's either at a point of kind of tipping the scale into a positive or gearing the foundation to be bought out. That would probably make more sense as opposed to starting on a zero kind of P&L and then making profits into year 3 to 5 from then on. So don't know. I'm curious.
So I mean, Editor would jump around a bit. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Takealot, and I'm looking forward to seeing that play out. But in your bio, you have this line that you said you've had the opportunity to work closely with many CEOs along the way who've mentored you and shaped your framework, skill sets, and executive business management. Could you tell me a bit more about that? Who have some of these guys been, and what have they taught you? How have they developed you? How are you a better person because of them?
Yeah, so an interesting combination of large corporates in that in itself went through a few mergers. So through those mergers and through, that's more on the logistical side with kind of Crossroads and what was before Cross Cape and Skynet, and there was a merger there, and that developed into a kind of a task team opportunity, and with that there was a reporting directly into effectively the sort of MD of that new group. And so tons of exposure on going through a large merger, dealing with those dynamic changes and equal retrenchments and understanding how that all works. Mentorship in terms of really getting to understand the deep business side of logistics and 3PL supply chain, and without that exposure through the task team role, that wouldn't have been possible. And then kind of later on in my life, getting stuck into development /IT /e-commerce or digital agency companies, in which were pretty small, and so direct reporting into the owner or the CEO in that regard, and really understanding kind of the building blocks around e-commerce. And it's a super interesting journey with the foundation of logistics, kind of warehousing, 3PL, and then a slow build on the, I guess, the very things that fundamentally make e-commerce, and that's the kind of website dev components, how that all works, the sort of marketplace side from a publications aspect, in which equally had their own kind of website functions, then to the more digital agency and the very kind of marketing execution of that website. And so there was a full circle when I joined Puma in terms of heading up e-commerce for South Africa, and truly understanding really every building block that is at the core really of e-commerce. So that's been quite a unique privilege in being exposed to each of those cores, and it's led me to where I am today.
Yeah, and I think leading an e-commerce team, just from my experience, because I mean I've also done it to some degree as well for a much smaller business. I led a team of about between 6 and 8 people. Obviously, it changed over time. And I think having that like really diverse background is incredibly helpful, because as you said, like e-commerce is really this mishmash of a whole bunch of things: logistics, marketing, web development. It's just like this whole funny stew of all those things.
Yeah, it's unique. It really is like no other. I mean, it's almost hard to find a comparison, and it's still new in this country, right? So I think 2-3 years ago, an e-commerce manager wasn't really a known or a popular role as such, and you were either one of something, whether it was a digital marketing person or a logistical minded operational person, but really a good e-commerce manager has a pretty grasp understanding of each of those pillars, and there's about 6 or 7. So still quite a unique role in this country.
What do you think of those 6 or 7 pillars that make up e-commerce?
Well, probably kind of sub pillars, but the maybe 4 core ones is logistics, 3 or 4. Logistics and supply chain really is one, and that's got a bunch of sub components from warehousing to outsourcing to returns and outbound, etc. But just general kind of logistics. Website development, just from a tech stack and understanding the fundamentals of what makes it function and run and operate. And then really the third, I'd say a fourth in these days, but a third being the digital marketing side. It's your traditional South African brand marketing agencies, of which most of them are. The fourth really, and I do believe it's a pillar, and there's very few, I believe, in this country, is performance marketing agencies, the real sort of lower funnel conversion agencies. Most are brand awareness, brand consideration sort of agencies. Few do a good job at true performance marketing. It's a fundamental difference.
Could you speak more into performance marketing and what exactly that is? How? Because I mean, I've heard a lot about the brand awareness and top of the funnel kind of stuff, but that bottom of the funnel stuff is also incredibly fascinating and important.
Well, it's highly data driven and almost product agnostic. Your upper funnel is to create awareness of a product within a brand that's relevant to the market at that time, and there's an ongoing seasonal cycle of performance marketing at the bottom really doesn't care much about product per se, but it's about intense data driven analytical decisions that effectively and ultimately drives conversion. And Johnny and Peter and Paul that are on channel 1, 2, and 3 at different times and based on different browsing interactions, that data AI engine, which is the performance marketing engine, will serve product based on what it truly believes that person at that time wants to buy because of, again, data-driven sets. And brand marketing agencies, typically, it's all about top-line funnel, it's brand awareness. It's obviously conversion, but it's not the number one metric. It's impressions, right? It's eyeballs. Ultimately, all we care about. I mean, my job is really about, we're a performance marketing side of the business. Our marketing team, their job is brand awareness. That's ultimately not our job. E-commerce is a performance marketing component.
So your job is more like the marketing team says, hey, Puma exists as a company, the product is great, but you guys are like, okay, the customer knows about us now, how do we make that a conversion?
Multifaceted touch points of different data to inform and know when that person may or may not want to buy, and the best utilization of that budget to ultimately get the conversion. Now that's it could be a product that's relatively old, that's not spoken about in the market, but ultimately it's going to buy at that time. So that's the performance marketing's job.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously you're the head of e-commerce for Puma. What are the metrics that you're checking on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis that basically tell you, hey, we're succeeding or we're not succeeding, or hey, we need to adjust something here?
No, look, there's dozens of hard and soft sort of KPIs that we look at daily, but your typical kind of retail ones, if you talk about on-site conversion and understanding what's moving, what's selling, ultimately it's your average order value, your kind of units per transaction. Alongside that, what is your return rate in relation to the sales on that day? And these are kind of soft KPIs that we can look at daily. There's kind of 3 segments. There's the product sort of metric KPI side, there's on-site KPIs, and then there's more operational sort of post-purchase KPIs. If you kind of go into each of those, the product side is, again, your traditional retail sell-through, rate of sale, etc., in relation to how much stock you have versus the calculation of never being out of stock, or the cost of being out of stock, and the loss of potential sales. And there's a ton of generic retail sort of KPI stuff around product. And I mean, on site you can get into the depths of kind of bounce rates and PLP conversions, PDP conversions, and there's a ton of e-commerce kind of related sort of KPIs. And operationally, that drives true sort of client lifetime value. So really understanding your post-purchase experience, interactions, returns. If you kind of tie all those together, you've got a golden record, and that starts to speak to a client lifetime value score. And it's tricky. I mean, we certainly haven't gotten it right. we look at all three of those KPI segments somewhat in silo, and to kind of bridge those together into what's called a golden record client lifetime value. It's incredibly tricky. It's a team on its own, and so that's probably our main focus is really understanding.
But you guys have an entire team dedicated to looking at these analytics and making informed decisions.
We're getting there. We're getting there slowly.
Okay.
I mean, we launched 4 months pre-COVID.
Okay.
So some could say quite good timing. We had a very blessed year in terms of a critical need to shop online and shop only online. So that really pushed us into
I think COVID almost catapulted South Africa 5 years in the future with e-commerce, because it definitely accelerated the rate at which people were buying online.
At a minimum 5 years, I agree.
Yeah. So maybe, I mean, like I could geek out and talk to you about e-commerce and stats all day. I mean, as I said, I've got e-commerce and SEO background, so looking at graphs and stuff is what I do for fun. But let's chat a bit about your career and how you ended up here at Puma. So, I mean, previously you had a company called eComplete, then you were at New Balance, if I'm not mistaken, and now you're currently at Puma. This company, eComplete, could you tell me a bit about that? It sounds very fascinating, the whole idea of e-commerce management as a business.
It certainly is. It's a unique model that I'm starting to see be replicated, but I do think they were first to the market in that regard. And kind of what they are is a end-to-end e-commerce solution offering from the kind of website build to the outsourcing or the insourcing for a warehouse, and the integration into the actual website itself, and then equally the outbound of orders and returns into one ecosystem. And then plugged alongside that is their kind of brand marketing engine, and they would maybe call it sort of performance marketing, but it's certainly a traditional brand marketing agency. So that they were born out of a long-term running brand marketing agency that morphed into a true end-to-end e-commerce sort of offering, and the core engine as such remained as their marketing engine, which made complete sense, and that allowed them to find partners in the warehousing and logistical space and have those as vendors to introduce, and it's fully integrated. It works well. I think New Balance was one of their first sort of main clients. And if I'm not mistaken, I speak on a correction, but I want to say to what extent, I'm not sure, but there's an investment. I saw an article recently. It slipped my mind. Kind of a large global retail organization invested. Again, to what extent, I'm not too sure. I don't know the name.
Okay. Yeah, but that's really interesting. So, I mean, with eComplete, essentially a customer could come to the company and say, we want to do e-commerce, which is, I think, it's becoming very common these days, especially in lieu of COVID. So, I mean, they could come to eComplete, they would set up a website for them, they would send up the logistics for them, and make sure all those integrations were running and working. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly. It's a turnkey to put your brand online and have it fully operational within 3 months.
Okay. And in terms of like customer service and stuff, would that be, I know like some companies like they try to avoid talking to the customer as much as possible. It's kind of, hey, this is e-commerce, everything is automated, we do that really well. Whereas other companies are kind of more hands-on. What was eComplete's stance in terms of that?
For a recall, there was a outsource component. Okay. I think it depended on the brand that they were taking online. For the most part, it was the brands that would have taken on the customer service elements and not the actual agency, which was eComplete. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, so what it sounds like, were you headhunted by New Balance from eComplete?
I was part of the build of this item, so there was a close relationship that was formed, and it was a relatively easy transition when an opportunity became available.
Okay. So what was your role at New Balance, and what did that look like?
So actually, it wasn't on the e-commerce side at all. I was more on the sort of wholesale sales side. So
Okay.
Working with the key accounts, such as Sportsman's Warehouse and TFG Group, and effectively selling the product into those key accounts as a sales component of the product or of the brand.
Okay. So you're more of a Puma guy or a New Balance guy now?
Very much Puma.
I'm more of a New Balance guy myself. I only wear New Balance.
Look at the brand, just to elaborate, at the brand of Puma, once you have at least from sort of month 3 to 6, you'll very quickly have almost zero other brand in your house.
I'm sure
it's a lived and breathed thing, and it's less a frowning aspect, but you wouldn't catch any other brand on any employee that's been here for more than a year.
Yeah, but I guess, what you'll probably find with most of those employees, obviously there's some benefit there to them, but you also start to feel loyalty towards the brand. But I think these days the gaps in technology and comfort between different brands, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it can't be that big.
Say that. Sorry, just repeat that.
Yeah, so if you look at a Puma shoe and a New Balance shoe, for the most part, they're both going to serve you equally as well. The gap in technology and innovation isn't going to be that big.
It depends which segment of the business. When it comes to the performance side, one can argue that there's vast differences, but for the most part, on the lifestyle aspect, it's a love for a brand for whatever reason that motivates you, whether you're an employee or someone that's just inspired and aligned with the brand's values. And the product itself, in some cases it could come out the same factory. But it's the affinity that you have and the reasoning behind what that brand stands for. And that's becoming more and more of a core belief I would like to myself strongly believe. Storytelling, brand telling, it's a core reason to aligning yourselves in your market.
Yeah, if you attend any marketing conference these days, they'll tell you, hey, the millennials, Gen Z and Gen X, they care about authenticity, and they use all these buzzwords, and it gets a bit annoying sometimes. But they've got a point. Like these younger people are coming in, and they do care about, is this brand, what they're doing, is it good for the environment, and is it good for the country, and are they using slave labor or whatever? So exactly. It's important.
Sustainability is probably at the forefront, less so on the Gen Zs, or the millennials, but that's becoming obviously more and more of a focus. One that comes to mind is probably Patagonia. For decades, many people have been aligned to what they stand for, and I think more and more brands are trying to follow that.
Have you read, I can't pronounce that guy's surname, but have you read, I think his name's Yvonne, have you read his book?
I haven't.
I highly recommend it. I don't know if you're a reader, but it's a fascinating book where he goes through basically all the core pillars in the business of Patagonia, and he talks about okay, this is how we manufacture, this is how we run the business, this is how we run logistics, this is how we source stuff, and everything is with regards to sustainability and employee wellness. The book's called Let My People Go Surfing. It's a fascinating book.
You mentioned employee wellness. We've got an average service standing length here across the employees as an average of something like 12 or 13 years, and it says a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It really says a lot, and that's quite unique. I've in my many years, I've never experienced that level of culture, and that's what makes you stand out, and that's what keeps not just customers but employees, and that drives client lifetime value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if an employee can embody the values of a brand, obviously you get these businesses where people are just there for the salary, they're there for the pay slip, but if employee really embodies the values and lives those out in their work, I think the byproducts of their work is just that much better.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good segue into my next question is, how would you describe your management style? You mentioned some stuff about agile project management. how do you manage your team? How big is your team?
It's a good question. It's a tricky one. From within the ecom team itself, we're now a team of 6. So that's growing quite quickly in the last sort of year and a half. And for the most part, I'd say my style is with autonomy. Well-mentored sort of training up front as best as possible, guidance and guidelines, and then do what you do best and run with it. Have structures in place to touch base periodically, weekly or monthly. I avoid micromanagements like the plague, unless obviously required. But it's a pretty shitty style, and if the team's well adversed and experienced in their own right, let them make those decisions because that's their expertise. I'm definitely not a specialist in any one of those areas. My umbrella is a broad one. Hire slow and fire fast. That's my motto.
Yeah. That's I think that's a good thing. I heard a saying once that you need to get the best people on the bus in terms of business. I know Netflix has this whole culture of like hire superstars. The thing is, we just want the best of the best on our team, and it makes so much sense because, I mean, if you're going to be stuck with someone, you said 12.5 years, I think it was, you want to make sure that they are a superstar and not like some average Joe slacker.
Yeah, I really want to say it's less, depending on the role, it's less about the skill, it's about the person. Skill you can teach, you can mold and teach a mentor, but it's the person. And if you just find the right people, they have the right attitude, that are aligned to your brands and mission, goals, and values, then you're in for a winning.
Yeah, we had this line where I was working previously. The whole thing was attitude over aptitude.
Yeah.
And I think that perfectly embodies what you're saying. So I mean, you said your team is of about 6 people. Are you able to outline what those people are, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are?
Yeah, none of it's non-public knowledge. I mean, it's 3 sort of key pillars. It's content and a assistant under there. It's the performance marketing manager and a business analyst under that. And then there's a slight void at the moment as a 3rd pillar, and that's the operations manager. That would be the 3rd. And then typically under that would be a customer service coordinator. So that person at the moment reports into me. And I think an important 4th pillar, whether a person or a function, depending where you are, is certainly CRM. Everything around CRM, that's a fundamental pillar. One could argue it's one on its own, or it's one under performance marketing. But those are your 4 functions, whether they're people or not. Those are your 4, core pillars in e-commerce, at least.
Okay. Yeah, and I think one of the first interactions we ever had was around CRM, and I think you were asking for recommendations on a CRM. Yes. Do you mind if I ask what CRM you guys are using or ended up using?
So when I refer to CRM, it's not just the actual customer component or tool, but it's the overarching, customer service sort of golden record in terms of where it lives, how we communicate to that golden record in terms of an email marketing tool, and then how we engage with the customer in terms of our conversation, which was what is the CRM tool to speak to the customer. That in the pillar of kind of CRM, but so we use a Freshdesk and Freshworks or Freshcaller for emails and phone calls, and that's currently where we are.
Yeah, and are you guys happy with it? I've heard a lot about it. I've tinkered with it.
It works. It's good. There's a few other options out there, but for the most part, where we are, it's serving its purpose. It's pretty straightforward.
So I don't know, maybe for people that are listening, because I mean, a lot of my audience, they come from all sort of walks of life and stuff. What is a CRM? What is the point of that, and why is it valuable? Why should a company have a CRM?
So I think it just depends when one refers to CRM, what part of it, but it's the central record and data around it and the communication tool around that record with the customer. And it speaks to the stronger and more comprehensive your CRM is, the more comprehensive and understanding you have of your kind of client lifetime value. So that's everything around the very customer that buys your product, what they buy, when they buy it, what they may buy, how you communicate to them when we think that they may buy that product, the mechanism in which you communicate to them, which is what email service provider do you use around that within the CRM. Every touch point you have around that one customer across all channels, so whether that's email, phone call, social, Facebook, Instagram, you ideally need one centralized golden record with each of those customers, and have a full lifetime metric score ultimately, because that's how you convert relevancy of when you know that your customer may or may not wants to buy something. And well, that could be a new product, it could be an old product, it could be something that around their birthday or around payday or certain events of the year. That all needs to live within the CRM pillar.
Yeah, absolutely. So does the software exist that does that? Because I certainly haven't found something that does all of that.
In one platform, I've yet to see it. I've seen something come close to it. I do still think there's at least 2 to 3 components that would make it up. I have short answer, no. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's probably something you'd have to get like custom developed, because I mean I've played with a lot of these softwares that call themselves CRMs, and some of them are more actual email service providers, some of them are actual just CRMs, and I mean they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's kind of such a schlep to find one that ticks all those boxes. Because I agree with you, because I mean at the end of the day, the last thing you want is siloed information in the business. You want your marketing team to be dealing with the same data that your sales team is dealing with and your customer support team is dealing with, and that's really, really, really tricky. I think from what I've seen, ERPs, I think it's enterprise resource planning software like Microsoft Dynamics. I know Oracle does one. I think Takealot uses the one. I forget what it's called. There's one called NetSuite. There's a whole bunch of them, and I think they're all trying to like really branch out into that field of CRM, get those multiple customer touch points, as you call them, and all bring them into one place. But as you said, I've yet to see one company do it really, really well.
I know that Zoho have a pretty comprehensive enterprise array. To what extent, again, not too sure, but they certainly seem to be in the kind of pack. And have local presence, which is good.
Yeah, no, Zoho is really great. Also really affordable. That's the other issue with a lot of these things is so I use Zoho, their books for my business, and it's looking fantastic. And as you say, it's great how like everything connects together. But yeah, as I said, I think we could geek out about this stuff for for hours. Tell me about sports. What role does sports play in your life? How do you keep active?
Well, at the moment, with a 3-year-old and a 6-month-year-old, sport isn't in the forefront, but it's a huge part. My background, for the most part, has been running, primarily trail running, and then a good sort of 6 to 8 years of paddling.
Okay.
So both kind of river and ocean, more so river. So your DZ and your Berg, your Brennan rivers. It's super important. It's something that at Puma it's entrenched. We've got a very large kind of auditorium feature here, and every 2 days there's a personal coach in, and half the company from 3:30 to 5 is kind of cranking it out, and there's a whole gym set up here, and it's super important. I haven't paddled for quite some time, since my little one, my first, was born. So I've kind of missed 2 paddling or 3 paddling seasons, but this year, in fact, now from March is when our local paddling season kicks in again, and so I'm going to put some put some hard graft down from March through to September, and yeah, I mean, I can feel I'm not the same. I'm not fresh. I'm not kind of well rested, because that's what sports does.
Yeah,
So
especially mentally.
Oh, absolutely, man. Just your endorphins, your kind of white and red blood cells, and it allows you to perform at your best. And so without that, you leaving yourself room for missed opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned trail running, and then you mentioned paddling river and ocean. Whereabout are you based?
So I'm in Cape Town, Pinelands.
Okay. So I mean, the reason I asked is the last podcast episode I did was actually with a guy by the name of Andrew Booth. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's
Vaguely.
Okay, so he's head of KZN trail running.
Okay.
And he's also organized the Kalkloof 100 miler. He's very big into trail running, organized adventure races all over South Africa and like out of Africa even. Well, not out of Africa, out of South Africa. So I just thought it was funny that he was the last guest I had on the show. Yeah, but I mean, I was also like quite a big trail runner back in the day, and then I was super injured, and it's so depressing not being able to get back on the trails. So I do empathize with you not being able to get out there because of the young ones. What kind of distances were you doing when you were trail running?
My last proper run was what was it? It was the Half Bay Challenge. It was like 40 or 50 Ks, kind of over some pretty hardcore terrain. Let's see here. What is the Half Bay Challenge? Yeah, I think it's 40 or 50 Ks. Road running, the most was the Two Oceans Ultra, so that was a 56.
Okay.
But for the most part, quite a few 21s. And then during the sort of paddling season, specifically February, up in Durban with the doozy and the training leading up to that. Well, you basically, I think you average about 20 kilometers with your boats through the Valley of the Thousand Hills.
Yeah.
So I was doing quite a bit of mileage locally around kind of Table Mountain and Newlands, kind of with my boat doing, I don't know, 5 or 10 Ks at a time, which is quite strange to the local people who didn't know, who don't know about doozy.
Yeah.
It's always pretty funny.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people that don't know about doozy. So I'm actually, as we speak, 2 kilometers from the start of where doozy starts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I live in Pietermaritzburg.
I was born in Maritzburg.
Oh, no wonder you're such a great person. I think like one thing that many people don't know about the doozy is that some of the portages can be pretty long. I think isn't the longest one 16 Ks?
I know
10 Ks, something like that.
Burma, it's more the height that you climb, but yeah, easily. I mean, I record 12 kilometers. I think 16 is possible. It's a pretty cool race
with the
because
boat.
yeah, exactly. It's boats anything from 12 to 16 kgs, depending on what a kind of fancy boat it is. Mine were always around sort of 14 kgs. So it's really at your peak that you kind of end the paddling season, pretty strong. So, but it's a really cool race because you get to strategically decide, for the most part, depending where you are and how serious you are about racing on the day, whether or not, depending how you feel at that portage, if you're going to portage or if you're going to paddle around. And depending how fast you can portage, you can quite often save a ton of time and make up some good space by portaging. But at the same time, you can burn out, and then you kind of back at the line again. So it's a fun race.
Yeah, this year's going to be very, very interesting because the rivers are absolutely like overflowing at the moment. They're super, super, super full. Like we've actually had like flooding and stuff. So I mean, it would have been a good year to do it, I think. I know there's a lot of strategy that goes into the rapids and like how to approach those as well. It's a fascinating race. I haven't done it personally, but I've done a lot of flat water paddling. So it's on my bucket list. But I think the key thing is to find someone to do it with first in a K2 before I attempt it in a K1.
Definitely, a lot can go wrong very quickly.
Yeah. So tell me more about your training for doozy. What did that look like?
Oh, I mean, look, it wasn't extreme. It was pretty basic. It was your weekly time trials, and Doozy is a funny one because it's before our paddling season even starts, because we have a winter paddling season that only runs from April through to July.
Okay.
So Doozy being February, March. Often it was off the back of the surf ski season, for me at least. So I'll be surf skiing through to typically fish. Fish is the last race of the year. That's in September, October.
Okay.
And so I would often kind of surf ski thereafter, October, November, December. December being a really good time to kind of surf ski. And then kind of flat water time trial, wrap up training, I'd say in Jan at the club, and then Doozy in Feb. So just depends. If you're not surf skiing, quite tricky. You'd have to rely on club paddling for the most part, because our rivers aren't really flowing leading at all leading up to Doozy. If you're in the Western Cape, at least. If you're in,
because you guys get all your rain in winter here.
Yeah, exactly. If you're in KZN, you sport for choice, and there's a ton of races leading up to Doozy, on the Doozy, I think, or the Mgeni.
Yeah, on the Mgeni there's plenty, especially in Berg and Track Challenge and all those various ones. Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned that you guys at Puma have these like gym classes and stuff. I always thought that was really cool. At my previous company, before I started my own business, what they used to do is they would give people time off work if they replaced their time with exercise, but we had to prove that we were exercising in their time, which I think is a flippin' great incentive to get employees working and stuff. I think it definitely helps with employee wellness and stuff. But like, what are some ways that businesses can integrate exercise into the workday and part of the
It's an interesting one. I mean, Puma's the first place I've seen that really been entrenched in the culture itself, and I think the venue itself plays a big role if you've got the space. I mean, our head office in Germany has a gigantic gym, the size of a sort of Virgin Active. So, well, that's easy. But for us, we have a large auditorium. But if you don't have those two things, and most really don't, some other smaller companies, we used to go for like lunchtime runs, again, depending on the location of the office. Throughout the year, as part of the kind of wellness journey, we have kind of quarterly initiatives on things like burpee challenges and push-up challenges and a ton of little things just to keep you off your seat and feet fit. It really depends on the culture, the location, your office space. But there's a bunch of things you can do. It doesn't have to be about getting out and running. As I said, burpee challenges and sit-ups and push-ups and some kind of fun stuff. And just being part of the things that exist, such as we aligning our big kind of Puma Walk Day with the Run My City, which is held in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and I'm not sure if it's in Durban. And so something like that's on a Sunday, for example, and we encourage, come and do it as part of the walk, and we'll give you the Monday off. But if you don't, well, then that's different. So
that's a great incentive. I was going to ask you about that next, is incentives, and I mean, getting the next day off. It's quite a nice thing. I think even if you're just going to walk the thing, I think people would be pretty. I mean, a Monday off, that's quite something. Do you have any other incentives to like kind of get employees out of their seat onto their feet, as you said?
Not really incentives as such, just well-structured and planned days, events, initiatives throughout the year. I'm actually part of the wellness committee, so we sit in Jan and we plan the year ahead, quarter by quarter, and we look at events that exist. We look at races that are hosted by other organizations, and we get tickets to those races, and we give those to the employees if they're keen. Or if anything, we kind of subsidize those tickets, and even the warehouse. So we have our own warehouse across the bridge here, and they've got a bunch of crazy initiatives inside the warehouse, things like trolley dashes and runs through the aisles and all these real fun kind of initiatives to kind of just to keep them fit. But those guys are crazy fit. I mean, they walk something.
I'm sure.
I don't know what the distance is a day, but
must be like tens of kilometers.
It really is, and they are super fit by default.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I know you've got a hard stop in about 10 minutes. So to wrap it up, I think a lot of younger people in South Africa these days kind of think that when you say e-commerce, the first thing that comes to their mind is drop shipping. But there's so much more to e-commerce than just drop shipping and like that scammy stuff that goes online. What would your advice be to younger people, say final years of school and university, that want to get into the e-commerce space? What are some of the skills they can brush up on? How can they get into the space?
Well, it just depends where it's going now with ChatGPT. I mean, you can technically write your own entire SEO strategy. Look, the pillars, you've got to understand through the line marketing. How do you communicate a brand and its message out adequately? What are the tools to use? Is it with an agency? I'd say getting agency experience is always a really good one, because a lot of the agencies nowadays, at least in this country, kind of touch across the full array of marketing that brand, and often that brand is online. So often it's aligned to e-commerce in some way or another, and unless it's a service, right, in which itself could have a e-commerce component. So agency experience, I think, is key. I think it's often overlooked, but a logistical foundation of just understanding the moving parts of supply chain, of getting product from A to B, the typical costs associated, who are the suppliers that are doing it well, how are they innovating? Because at the end of the day, your logistical partner is almost the face of your brand, because that's the last person that you that you see before you get the product, is the courier driver.
Yeah.
So understanding the courier space, which is rapidly changing. If you look at Checkers 60 and you got Dropper working with Spar, you got all these kind of key retailers really doing 1 hour delivery, and it's a matter of time until you get phenomenal in an hour. I mean,
my wife and I don't go to the shops anymore, honestly.
Yeah, so don't take that for granted and just kind of outsource and hand that over. Have a good understanding of what I call kind of supply chain, which is from beginning to end, and often not beginning, because that involves the actual factory where it's manufactured and the shipping that's involved. So more about once that product that your merchandising and brand team have either designed or bought into, once it's here, how do you get it out to your customer and then get it back again? Returns will make or break any e-commerce business.
Absolutely.
Kind of agency experience around talking about your brand and marketing it out. The logistical movement of that product is key. And it's super handy just having a bit of dev, just the basic foundations of how does a e-commerce site run, what are the typical platforms it runs on, and how does it work? Like, where does it live? Where does it host? What makes up the back end of the virtual machine and the three components to it, RAM, compute, and storage? That's pretty important to understand, and not just hand it off to your like dev team to of course they're going to manage and run with it, but having a high level there, I think is good.
Yep, absolutely. Especially if you're in a management position. You don't want to be in the position where you strong arm a developer into building some bloated piece of software that then goes and affects your website. Exactly.
I think if they can get exposure to those three sort of areas, that's a good start.
Absolutely. So, Christopher, thank you so much for your time. Just in parting before we end this call, is there any links, or do you have any social profiles, any websites that you'd like listeners to go check out?
Well, they can go to puma.com and check out our site. It's evolving quite nicely every day.
Absolutely.
It's za.puma.com, but if you just type in puma.com, it'll most likely redirect you based on your geolocation. If those that don't know the brand, that's a good place to go and have a kind of a browse around. Other than that, nothing really comes to mind.
Awesome. Christopher, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the chat. Just trying to respect your time here.
No, listen, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to chat.